Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar in the EMA's Knowledge Series 2020, which is part of the activities to commemorate our 25th anniversary. This afternoon's topic, preparing for the CEC process or understanding the CEC process, and CECs mean Certificate of Environmental Clearance. So if you hear the term CEC during the presentations, you'll know that it's the Certificate of Environmental Clearance. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to share with you some information with respect to the two virtual platforms we'll be using. We're using Zoom, and we're also simultaneously broadcasting on Facebook Live. With respect to Zoom, we will be entertaining questions in the chat box. So we will not be having the raised hand option, but you can use the option of the clap icon or the thumbs up if you believe our presentation is effective and is interesting, which I'm sure it will be. With respect to Zoom, we also have a poll which we'll be launching about 15 minutes before the presentation ends, which will be about 1:45. And this poll is 4 questions, very simple, short questions that we'd like you to answer. The poll, by the way, is on the presentation. So based on what the presenters have given to you or have explained to you. And we will launch the poll. It will be up for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we will close the poll. In addition, for those of you who may have had questions that were not answered or not answered in detail as you would like them to be answered, we have an email address that you can send these questions to, and it is emawebinars@ema.co.tt. EMA webinars, one word with an S, @ema.co.tt. We will also be recording this presentation, and it will be uploaded to our website, www.ema.co.tt. And from there, there'll be a link to our Facebook tube, which is Environmental Management Authority. So you'll be able to see this presentation by tomorrow afternoon. So I will now like to introduce our presenters. First, we have Arnott Jones. Arnott has been with the EMA for 15 years, and his background is in geology, geography, GIS, as well as urban planning. He will be followed by Alicia Laurent Wing, who has been with the EMA for 13 years, and her background is in marine ecology. We also have a resource person from the CEC unit, and that's Nadia Gore, and she'll be working with our corporate communications specialist, Mr. Wendell Constantine, and they will be fielding and answering questions that come up in the Facebook Live chat. So we have with us, and Nadia, of course, I should tell you a little bit about her. She has been with the EMA for over 10 years, and her background is in coastal and marine resources management. So without further commentary from me, I would now like to introduce Arnott Jones to begin the presentation. Arnott?
So hi, good afternoon. Thanks, Marcia, for the introduction. And I'll begin by introducing you to the CEC process and begin with an overview of all primary legislation and the different pieces of subsidiary legislation which inform or prescribe the manner in which we issue and process CEC applications. So just to give you a brief outline. So firstly, we look at the primary legislation and subsidiary pieces that we also use or employ in processing applications. We follow this by discussing the objectives of the CEC process and the rules which inform or assist us in processing these applications. We'll all go a bit deeper into the CEC process and the designated activities which establish thresholds and identify specific activities which require some sort of regulatory input or guidance prior to being initiated. We look at the process in applying or submitting applications. And Again, we'll go a bit deeper into the CEC process and look at the different types of determinations and outcomes. And finally, we'll open up for some questions. So without much ado, if we still look at so this is our primary piece of legislation that governs the EMA function or roles, even the form and structure of the authority. So the EM Act was initially ascended in 1995, however it was subsequently repealed and replaced in 2000 by our current piece of legislation. And this piece of legislation outlines our coordinating role, our policy-making functions, our education and public awareness role as well, and critically and pertinent to the CEC process, it's our regulatory and enforcement function. This is succinctly expressed in the preamble to the legislation, which you see before you. To read it out, it reads, to coordinate, facilitate, and oversee the execution of national environmental strategies and programs, to promote public awareness of environmental concerns, and to establish an effective regulatory regime. So, what are the roles and functions set up under this piece of legislation? So again, we look at our coordinating role, our partnership with several key stakeholders and organizations. So for instance, the EMA has established in excess of 30 memorandum of understanding with ministries, agencies, academic institutions, which foster support and this collaborative approach in making sound decisions regarding the processing of CEC applications. Our legislative and policy making role, as you'll see in subsequent slides, several pieces of subsidiary legislation have been enacted under this primary piece of legislation. And also a policy making role. As you may or may not be aware, we annually prepare reports, the National Environmental Policy, State of Environmental Reports, just to name a few of some of the policy documents prepared under the facilities provided in this legislation. Education and public awareness. As evident even today in today's presentation, I mean, this webinar forms a critical role in trying to present or to share the work of the EMA, as well as to provide some insight on how the CEC process functions and how even yourself, even the simple applicants, can be aware of the process and submit applications. So what are some of the pieces of subsidiary legislation? So just to look at it in a counterclockwise orientation, and pertinent to this presentation today, we have the CEC rules, or the Certificate of Environmental Clearance rules. Also, and these are some of those subsidiary, but these are also critical considerations and resources we consider in processing applications. So we have the environmentally sensitive species rules, environmentally sensitive areas rules, water pollution rules, air rules, noise pollution control rules, and pending the waste management rules. So looking at the objectives of the CEC process, the CEC process provides a multi-dimensional, dynamic sort of tool that enables us to facilitate environmental management, to ensure consequences or issues, nuisances, etc. are considered with regards to development in Trinidad and Tobago. It allows us to effectively identify, manage or mitigate impacts that may arise as a consequence of new, modified, expanded, decommissioned or abandoned works. And these abandoned works can relate to decommissioning social infrastructure. For example, if you have hospitals, which themselves fall within the scope of designated activities, and in decommissioning these types of facilities, ensuring that waste, equipment, and even the demolition of the physical structure is done in an ecologically and environmentally sound manner. And finally, it all encapsulates, or to look at it holistically, we need to consider this all in the framework of sustainability. We need to be mindful of ourselves, our position as small island developing states. As such, we should be cognizant of issues, challenges, and opportunities which confront us because of our limited land area, finite resource base, vulnerability to natural hazards, as well as, and particularly in the context of sustainable development, us being signatories or parties to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So to have a closer look at the framework which exists regarding the CEC process. And one subsidiary piece of legislation which is critical in the CEC process is the CEC rules. And these rules outline the details that have to be included in CEC applications, timelines involved in processing applications, the outcome or determination of CEC applications. So even being mindful of that, the CEC process also includes a list of 44 designated activities. While we may not be able to list them all, but just to have an idea of them by sector, the CEC process attempts to address, to manage, or to regulate activities related to agriculture, as in arable crop propagation, livestock rearing. Even in livestock rearing, we also have to be mindful that the CEC designated activities sets thresholds or prescribed limits. So for example, livestock rearing, if it's poultry rearing, as we see in the image on screen, we should exceed 250 heads of birds, or livestock, be it cattle or large or small ruminants, be it rabbits, goats, sheep, should not exceed 25 heads of livestock. Earthworks, as well as coastal type activities. Coastal type activities could range from land reclamation or even coastal protection. So even where critical assets may be at risk because of issues such as climate change or an adjacent activity which may result in some issue at that particular site, is also fall within the scope of the CEC designated activities order. Some further activities that we can look at by sector include oil and gas exploration, both onshore and offshore, waste management, processing and recycling facilities, quarrying or mining, as well as service type of activities such as automotive repair and auto body type operations. And finally from me, before I hand over to my colleague, just a quick look at a final piece of legislation we look at. This relates to the fees and charges. So a typical CEC application would be attached to a $500 application and processing fee. However, this fee could vary depending on the nature and the rigor of assessment required. And classically, this is where an environmental impact assessment would be deemed necessary further assessment of the activity. So in this case, the fee lays out a schedule of charges, and these charges can range from $5,000 up to $600,000, again, depending on the type of activity, and this activity is also linked to the fees and regulation. So depending on the specific designated activity, a fee would be assigned or attached based on the activity. And just finally, this is just the account. We just provided the information of the account that the fees are paid to, or paid into, sorry. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Ms. Alicia Lorwing, and she'll continue with the second half of our presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Anat. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Alicia Lorwing, and I'm an Environmental Program Officer with the CEC unit. And this afternoon, it is my pleasure to share with you information as it pertains to submission of the CEC application and the CEC process. So as Anat would have explained to us, the CEC framework, which includes the designated activities, the CEC rules, and the fees and charges. But when is a CEC required? A CEC is required prior to the establishment, modification, expansion, decommissioning, or abandoning of any project which falls under the Designated Activities Order 2001. In order to apply to submit your CEC application, 2 forms must be submitted. The pre-screening form, which includes an administrative checklist, which guides the applicant in the types of administrative documents that should be submitted in support of the CEC application. For example, a deed or a lease for the proposed site. And the second form is the CEC application form A, which requests information on the project details, the applicant's details, as well as it usually asks you for a preliminary assessment of your potential environmental impacts, as well as your proposed mitigation measures to be included for the project. Supplementary information that can also be submitted with the CEC application would be the project scope of works and an estimated schedule. A site layout plan, which tells us or shows us exactly how the project will be laid out in relation to its existing environment, as well as a process description if applicable. Please note that the EMA can ask for additional information based on the scope of works that has been submitted. Once the applications are completed and the pre-screening form must be submitted with the CEC application form A, if your proposed project requires express planning permission from the Town and Country Planning Division, then your application needs to be lodged to the Town and Country Planning Division office that has jurisdiction for the area for the project site. So for example, if you're doing a project in Arima, then your application should be submitted to the TCPD office that is located in Tunapuna. Applications for all other designated activities that do not require express planning permission, such as offshore activities, they could be submitted electronically to the EMA at cec@ema.co.tt. As of September 1st, 2020, so just at the start of this month, TCPD has an online portal system for the submission of their applications via Develop TT. And this is under the Automated Construction Permitting System. This system includes a number of regulatory agencies, such as TCPD, if you're requiring planning permission, the EMA for permission for approval for CECs, approvals from the municipal corporations, as well as any approvals that you require from WASA. Now, there are 2 regions, T1 and T5, that have been identified by TCPD. And at this time, or as of September 1st, TCPD is only accepting electronically submitted applications. So no paper-based applications will be accepted from the TCPD office. Once TCPD actually reviews the application, then they will guide the applicant with respect to how they can go through the CEC process using the ACPS system. Any additional information that you require on this system can be found at develop.gov.tt or ttbizlink.gov.tt. So you've submitted your CEC application, and the EMA now has the opportunity to review the details of the application and engage with the applicant in making a determination. So once the EMA receives the CEC application, then an officer is assigned to your application. The officer will contact you to arrange a site visit, and at this site visit, the officer and the applicant will have a preliminary discussion on what you're proposing to do, and will have the opportunity to observe the surroundings of the proposed site. An acknowledgement will be issued to you within the first 10 working days, and if the EMA requires any further information, then a request for further information is also issued with the first acknowledgement. The applicant then has the opportunity to provide the responses to the outstanding information, of which the EMA will review and make a determination if we have all of the information that is necessary. If, however, there is information that is outstanding, or based on the information that you have provided to us, new issues emerge, then a request for clarification of further information is sent to the applicant, requesting clarification or additional information which is required for the determination. And this process is usually done in consultation with the applicant and the assigned officer. So the officer continues to work with the applicant as we go through the entire CEC process. At this time, in light of COVID-19 restrictions, the EMA is accepting these responses electronically at our website, at our email address at cec@ema.co.tt. Once the information has been reviewed and assessed, then a determination is made within 30 working days from the date of receipt of the information. Now, what are some of the environmental issues that we consider when we review the information that is submitted to us? Some of the impacts that are considered pertain to the impacts of water quality as a result of your proposed project. So does your project actually have an end-of-pipe discharge that can have an effect on the surrounding environment? So EMA will review the design of your project or your facility to ensure that the end-of-pipe discharge is in compliance with the second schedule, with the relevant parameters of the second schedule of the water pollution rules. Another factor that we consider would be what are the potential impacts to the air quality. A lot of the times during the construction phase, dust becomes an issue, and therefore the EMA will review and assess what are your potential mitigation measures to reduce this impact on the surrounding environment. We also consider impacts to flora and fauna, to plants and animals. So for example, if you're clearing an expansive area, then is it close to any environmentally sensitive areas, or is it the habitat for any environmentally sensitive species? So an assessment is also considered there. And the last example that I will share with you is that we also look as we review the management and disposal of waste, including hazardous and non-hazardous waste. The CEC applications are project specific. Each application that you submit to us is reviewed and assessed on a case-by-case basis, and as such, no two CEC applications are the same. So for example, if you look at the screen, both slides represent discharge points for domestic wastewater treatment plants. On my left, the discharge location is a nearshore coastal environment, whereas on my right, the discharge location is in a river. And therefore, the review and assessment, while they may be the same nature in terms of a domestic wastewater treatment plant, the scale sometimes varies and the actual location is also varies. So these are taken into consideration when the application is reviewed. The assessment is based on the nature, scale, and location of where you're proposing to have your project. So let's just quickly go through the CEC flowchart process. And we would see where I have already mentioned that once you submit your application, we have 10 working days of which to issue an acknowledgement. Within those 10 working days is where the site visit would be conducted with the applicant. And once the information of the application is reviewed, and based on any information that we would have observed or obtained at the site visit, there are 3 or 4 determinations that can be made based on the CEC rules. The first determination is that based on the review of the information, once the project does not fall under a designated activity, then a no CEC determination can be made, and the applicant is advised of such. If, however, it does require a CEC because it falls under the designated activities, then based on the review, a CEC may be required, but no EIA. Once that is the determination, then the information is reviewed, and once the EMA again has all of the information that is required, will issue a determination letter within 30 working days from the date of the submission of the information, and within this 30 working days, also a determination is also made. The EMA can also make a determination based again on the nature, scale, and location of the project that a CEC and an EIA are both required. And as such, the rules guide us on the EIA process. And just to share this with you briefly, once an EIA is required, then the applicant is notified of this determination, and a draft terms of reference is prepared in consultation with the application within 21 working days from the time that the applicant was notified of the EIA determination. Once the draft terms of reference has been issued, the applicant is notified by a letter, and they're also notified of the EIA processing charge, which Arnott would have spoken about, and this needs to be paid before the draft terms of reference is collected. Once the applicant collects the draft terms of reference, then this must be shared with relevant stakeholders, and any requests for the draft terms of reference must be submitted to the EMA in writing in a report, and the EMA will consider the requested changes and make the changes in the final terms of reference where it deems fit. Once the final terms of reference has been issued, and this would be within 10 working days, then the applicant uses this as a guide to conduct the study of the environmental impact assessment. Once the AIA is ready to be submitted to the EMA, then it is submitted and reviewed, and within 80 working days, a decision is made on whether or not to grant a CEC. The fourth determination, so we have no CEC, CEC required but no EIA, EIA required. The fourth determination based on the rules, which is not on our process flow chart, is that a notice of refusal can also be issued. And this determination can be made if the applicant has submitted a CEC application for an activity that is already completed. If a notice of refusal is issued, then it is issued with the reasons for the refusal. If a CEC is issued, then it is issued with terms and conditions which must be followed by the applicant when conducting the activity. The applicant has the right to appeal EMA's determination or decision at the Environmental Commission. So just to quickly share with you some resources that are available at the EMA, especially if you're an applicant and you are going through the process for the first time and you want some additional assistance. The EMA has the Environmental Reference Library, which is located at our 8 Elizabeth Street office in Port of Spain. And at this library, we have the National Register, which houses all the CEC applications that have been submitted to the EMA. And as such, this is a very resourceful tool, because if you are submitting an application and you're not too sure of the type of information or the amount of detail that is required, then you are encouraged to visit the National Register. And with the assistance of our librarian, Ms. Scott, she will guide you and she will provide you with the CEC applications where CECs have been issued for a project similar to yours. The reference library also has journals, policy documents, and other reference material that may be useful for you to actually submit or provide the information that we need. Please note, however, at this time, the EMA is closed to the public, and therefore, any appointments or any visits to the EMA would have to be done strictly via an appointment system by simply calling the EMA's number at 226-4362 and requesting an appointment and stating exactly the type of information that you need so that the EMA can facilitate you. You can continue interacting with the EMA on our virtual platforms, including the EMA's website, which has a lot of information as it pertains to legislation and different aspects of the roles and functions of the EMA, our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and the EMA's YouTube site. So this brings me to the end of our presentation. I would just like to thank you for your kind attention. And at this time, I will turn you back over to Marcia, where we will open the floor to questions and any comments that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia and Anat, for that very, very thorough and also attractive presentation. I'm sure many of you who have had issues with respect to understanding some of the procedures with respect to the CEC process are much clearer now. So we'll now take the questions that appear in the chat box. Some of the questions from the Facebook comments will also come into the chat box, depending on whether they could have been answered in Facebook or not. So we will begin with the Q&A session. So first question is, what's an environmental impact assessment? Alicia, would you care to take that question, please? What's an environmental impact assessment?
Thank you for the question. So an environmental impact assessment, also known as an EIA, is a study that allows the applicant to look at what they're proposing to do and the potential significant impacts or risks that are associated with the proposed activity, and then allows for mitigation measures to be considered to minimize the impacts and or risk to an acceptable level. It also allows for public consultation with the neighboring communities or the surrounding communities. And this is usually, if requested by the EMA, is usually done in consultation or guided by the terms of reference, the final terms of reference that has been issued by the EMA. So it is a decision-making tool, and it allows for the project to be considered in terms of environmental practices and the potential outcomes of the project as it relates to the surrounding environment.
Thank you, Alicia, for that very detailed response. Our next question is, good afternoon. I noticed besides the offshore rigs that the legislation covers activities on land. Does the CEC rules cover offshore activities such as aquaculture or mariculture? It appears the rules only mention them if they occur on land. I will repeat the question. I noticed besides the offshore rigs that the legislation covers activities on land. Does the CEC rules cover offshore activities such as aquaculture or mariculture? It appears the rules only mention them if they occur on land. And Alicia will take that question.
Sure. Thanks again for that question. So while the designated activities may not speak directly, now we speak about aquaculture and we speak about it in terms of the size of a pond, there may be some other activities based on your scope of works which may require a CEC, may fall under the definition of the designated activities. And that is why applicants are always encouraged to meet with the EMA. We usually encourage pre-application meetings, but now in light of COVID, these may have to be virtual meetings. But you're encouraged to meet with the EMA. The technical officers are always willing to meet with the public. Tell us some more about your project. And while the main component of your project may not require a CEC because it may not fall under designated activity, some of the other activities that you're proposing to do may actually fall under the designated activities. So for the purpose of that project, you are encouraged to call the EMA, have a discussion with one of the technical officers, and we will be able to give you some further guidance as to whether or not a CEC is required. But that determination, that formal determination of whether a CEC is required, can really and truly only be done through the submission of a CEC application where the EMA will have the application and the details of the scope of what you're proposing to do in front of us to actually review and to go through the CEC process. Thanks, Marcia.
Perhaps Arnott might be able to address this question. Given the social distancing restrictions in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19, how should an applicant conduct the EIA public meetings? Given the social distancing restrictions in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19, how should an applicant conduct the EIA public meetings?
Okay, thanks. And that's a pretty interesting question. And maybe one I could share a recent experience with. As the legislation sets out, if I recall off the top of my head, I believe it's section 28 of the legislation, which speaks to the public engagement process. It shouldn't hold fast to public meetings, but an engagement. So as we're doing today, we're using Zoom. So mobile platforms can be a key tool to facilitate this engagement process. We have limits in terms of public gatherings. So this can be an opportunity for focus groups as opposed to large scale, broader forum type meetings. And from experience, this could be equally as useful and beneficial. Targeting that key stakeholder group, be it fence line communities, for example. You could say fence line communities. This could be pretty useful because sometimes they're a bit intimidated in larger audiences. So it can be a challenge, but we need to look at the opportunities from this new normal that we speak when we refer to this pandemic that we're trying to be safe and protect ourselves from. So technology, smaller focus type groups, and even building it sequentially, using your public notices to solicit your specific type of groups, focus groups, online platforms, social media. All of these can be now employed, or we should be more rigorously utilizing these tools to engage the public. So it shouldn't be a hindrance, but an opportunity to be a little more creative in the way that we reach out and engage our stakeholders. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Arnott. And it's good that you have had that experience recently so that you were able to draw on that reference. Before we continue, I'd just like to ask participants, please, to mute your microphones. We did that at the beginning when the session started, but unfortunately, some people have been unmuting and we're getting a lot of feedback. So please ensure that your microphones are muted. Thanks a lot. So we go on to the next question, or maybe it's a suggestion. Some time ago, the EMA produced booklets on the CEC application process. Any chance of this being repeated? Good for education and public information. And I could probably answer this question, being in the public education unit. We will be doing this because we've been working closely with the CEC unit. A lot of information has to be revised. So we will definitely be doing this, and perhaps on a different platform as opposed to hard copy, since now we have to do most things virtually. So thank you very much for that, insight, and we will definitely follow through on your suggestion. Next question. Are there any standard criteria to determine whether an EIA is required or not? Thank you. So either Arnott or Alicia, whichever one of you would like to take that question.
Thank you, Marcia. I can respond to it. The question being if there is any standard criteria to determine whether or not an EIA is required. Again, we go back to the fact that CEC applications are reviewed and assessed on a case-by-case basis. And in making a determination of whether or not an EIA is required, the EMA usually looks at the nature, scale, and location of the proposed activity in relation to its surrounding environment. And this is usually done using also an internal tool that we use to make or assist us in making this determination of whether or not an EIA is required. So in terms of standard criteria, the criteria is more or less standardized, but we are using nature, scale, and location for the specific projects.
Thank you, Alicia. We have a comment here, which is very inspiring. Annalisa says, very good presentation. Thank you for sharing. And we're always heartened when we have positive feedback. So thank you so much. The next question, how does the CEC process apply to government projects such as construction of publicly accessed tourism sites, etc.? How does the CEC process apply to government projects such as construction of publicly accessed tourism sites, etc.? Okay, perhaps Anna or Alicia, I'm not quite sure which one of you would like to tackle that question.
If I can maybe come in. We all should be mindful of public space and access to public spaces, be it recreational spaces as well, if you're referring to beaches. The state, as any other stakeholder, will be subject to the process, to the CEC process. So subject to the same application process, as Alicia was explaining, based on the complexity of the application, the EIA process as well. Again, it may not, or may, because it's based on the nature of the application where an EIA is required. However, we do still encourage the engagement process. So that usually serves as a useful tool to engage, as opposed to commencing the project and resulting in conflicts between users. Because beaches, to return to the example of beaches in our territory are a critical asset, not only recreational, but also our fishers. Our fishers use these facilities for their livelihood. So it's important that we have that sort of interaction and continuous communication and the CEC process, both formally in the EIA process, as well as through requests for further information. You always, or typically, I mean, it's all based on this nature and scope of the application. We would insist on this engagement sort of process or interaction from the genesis of the application. So you'll see from our application phase or request for further information, we ask applicants to engage with stakeholders who use and occupy the spaces to limit that sort of conflict between developer, be it state or private entity, and the users and occupiers of these public spaces.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that very detailed explanation. When visiting the CEC register to look at CEC applications that have been successful, is the full application available? What level of detail is provided? How do you go about making an appointment? 3 parts to that question, so I'll just repeat. When visiting the CEC register to look at CEC applications that have been successful, is the full application available? What level of detail is provided? How do you go about making an appointment?
Okay, so thank you very much for that question. The full application, all information that has been used, submitted by the applicant and issued by the EMA is included in the application, and therefore it is available to the public for review, and the details, all the details of the application are included, unless there is a claim for confidentiality, which has been upheld based on the EMA's review of the request and obviously a request by the applicant. So that these applications, as I would have mentioned, are very good in terms of, or very useful in terms of a resource tool or a guide for persons who are going through our process for the first time, because the information is there in the National Register. How do you make an appointment? You can call the EMA's number at 4362. And our receptionist is there. She would be happy to assist you in making an appointment to visit the National Register. And if you require any other information, then feel free to send us an email at emawebinars@ema.co.tt, and we will facilitate your request. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Another positive comment. Very useful guidance through the process, a very good platform to provide clarification, great initiative. And thank you so much to that person. Suresh is his name. Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. The next question is, what drives the cost of the EIA? What drives the cost of the EIA? Would Arnott or Alicia be able to
respond to that one, Marcia?
You'd like to use, okay, sure. What drives the cost of the EIA?
The cost of the EIA is pretty much pegged to the applicable designated activities in reference to the fees. So we have the legislation sets out a schedule of fees, and so these fees are matched, if I could use that term loosely. So they are matched to the designated activities, and that's how we would assign a fee for the processing of the EIA, of an EIA.
And as you're there, you can also respond to this next question. Is the CEC based on the polluter pay principle or another environmental principle? Is the CEC based on the polluter pay principle or another environmental principle?
I won't say the polluter pay principle in the purest terms of it, because we're pretty much the CEC designated activity order, because we should all pin it back to the designated activities order. It sort of provides a codified type of format in which we bring certain types of activity and development within the scope of the CEC process. So, for example, even though we just looked at them in terms of sector, we can go through the list of 44 designated activities and some of the sub-activities. So it's all a matter of these activities hitting a particular threshold that would bring them within the scope of the CEC process. Thinking of it in terms of the polluter pays principle may not be the purest way to look at it, because it's all based on exceeding thresholds or limits set out in the designated activity order, as opposed to effluent or emission or any or particular waste stream being discharged into the environment and you being assigned a charge or fee subject to the volume or the concentration of that waste. So it attempts to manage or regulate the type of development. And again, looking at some of the subsidiary legislation that we would all consider in reviewing the application, drafting a certificate of environmental clearance. So for example, your air rules, your water rules, these would prescribe limits that must be, the activity must be within these prescribed limits. So is it a matter of, so the CEC rules are set up slightly different, if I could. I hope that clarifies your or shed some insight on your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnott. Just wanted to mention that in the interest of time, we'll be taking questions and possibly at least two, or for the most two from each participant. But remember, we have the EMA email set up, emawebinars@ema.co.tt. So any of your questions that may not have been answered during this forum, please do send them to that address, okay? So the next question, we would like to know what prompted the EMA to change their interpretation of CC Rule 5.2 and 5.3. Was it as a result of any legal opinion? And if so, can a copy of this opinion be provided? Would either Alicia or Arnott want to shed some light on that? Or could we possibly get involved in a lot of detail?
That, I mean, even responding, even the response they will be looking for, maybe best that if they could email that one into us,
Yes, please.
So email to us. I believe the email address was provided on the end screen, and maybe Marcy, if you could share that with us at the end, with them at the end, so we could better respond to you. I mean, this, with the constraints of time, to best get into that response, if you could email, and we'll be in contact.
Right. Thank you, Anat. Yes. So we will ask for you to send that question to emawebinars@ema.co.tt because it requires a lot of detail. There may be another question. I'm just looking through now, scrolling through. If the applicant needs more time to prepare for the CC, further information, can an extension be granted beyond the 30 days? And is there a cost attached? I'll just repeat because I fumbled a bit. If the applicant needs more time to prepare the CC, further information, can an extension be granted beyond the 30 days? And is there a cost attached?
So, Marcia, I can respond to that question. Thank you again for that question. The CEC rules really, in terms of timelines, speak to the time taken. It specifies time taken for the EMA to review information and provide a determination for the CEC application. But once the information has been requested, then the applicant is provided with a timeline that's really a guidance to encourage them to submit the responses in a timely manner to the EMA. However, if it is that you require additional information, that you are working on obtaining the information that is required for the EMA to make the determination, and you do require additional time, then you simply send a letter to the EMA requesting the extension and providing us with a date at which you are proposing to submit. Don't just ask for an extension, but say that you would like an extension until December 31st, 2020, perhaps. And once that is provided to us or submitted to us in writing, then the EMA would usually respond granting the extension, allowing the applicant the opportunity to provide the information so that a determination can be made.
Thank you very much, Alicia. At this point, we are going to launch the poll. As I said, 4 very simple questions. It will last about 3 to 4 minutes, and then it will be stopped. The next question, I'd like either one of you to address. Given that the draft TOR, and for those of you who are not familiar with the lingo, terms of reference, TOR, is developed by the EMA in consultation with the applicant. If the applicant does not want to make modifications, is the applicant still mandated to host public consultations? I'll just repeat that. Given that the draft TOR or terms of reference is developed by the EMA in consultation with the applicant, if the applicant does not want to make modifications, is the applicant still mandated to host public consultations? Anat, would you like to take that question, please?
Yeah. So I believe there's 2 issues that should be sort of clarified there. Firstly, the draft terms of reference, you are asked to consult on the draft terms of reference with key stakeholders, as opposed to a public consultation. So the public consultation process is going to be a component of the EIA. So in preparing the environmental impact assessment, to gather views, perspectives, sometimes community-specific details, that's where the public comment period would come in. But relates to the terms of reference, so this is, yes, it feeds into the environmental impact assessment. However, we ask at this point that you take the terms of reference to stakeholders, and we would typically list or suggest stakeholders that you can engage depending on the nature of your activity. Let's say it's a coastal type activity that you engage with the Ministry of Works, the Coastal Protection Unit of the Ministry of Works, your Town and Country Planning Division, your Commissioner of State Lands. Just for example, just to list some of the stakeholders that you would ideally interact with to sort of ensure that there's any gaps that exist in the terms of reference, that we sort of address these. So when it builds into preparing your environmental impact assessment, opportunity for these gaps to reappear and serve as limits or challenges, which in the review of the documents may come back. Later on, just not to go too much into the EIA process, but may come back and require clarification. So again, we ask upfront to you engage or liaise with some of these stakeholders, these regulatory and advisory agencies, to provide some comments, to provide some insights. There may be instances where we're too rigorous or too lenient, so on both ends of the spectrum. So to just have the stakeholders come in, have a look, comment on the terms of reference as opposed to the public comment process, which is part of the EIA preparation.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for that very detailed explanation. Next question. Are the mitigation measures included in CEC conditions costed? What avenues do we have in cases where the cost of implementation of mitigation measures is too high? Are the mitigation measures included in CEC conditions costed? What avenues do we have in cases where the cost of implementation of mitigation measures is too high? Alicia, would you like to take that question, please?
Yes, thank you, Marcia. The mitigation measures in a CEC application or in a CEC are usually done in consultation with the applicant. The CEC application form asks for the impacts and the mitigation measures. So what are the potential impacts? What are the mitigation measures that you do propose? Depending on, again, the nature, scale, and location of the activity, there are some mitigation measures that are more rigorous than others. And the EMA usually does this in consultation with the applicant. Whether or not the mitigation measures are costed, it's not costed by the EMA. Mitigation measures, depending on potential environmental impacts, are reviewed and considered based on best management practices and international guidelines, local standards. And therefore, this is what we use as our guide in terms of including mitigation measures in the terms and conditions of the CEC once a CEC is issued.
Thank you, Alicia. I just want to let everyone know that although we are supposed to end at 2 o'clock, which is now, because of how dynamic and how important this topic is, we will continue for another 10 minutes. So many of you may not have your questions answered in this forum, but again, I want to reiterate that you can send it to ema-webinars@ema.co.tt. So here's the first question coming in from Facebook. Now, as I said, we have our resource person there who will be fielding or is fielding the questions from Facebook, but some of them are also coming in on the chat. So this is the first one. Do you have a record of how many reports of CEC breaches have been made over the past few years? And we're not quite sure about few years, so maybe we may look at maybe a 3-year period. Alicia, would you like to address that question?
Marcia, can you just repeat the question, please?
Do you have a record of how many reports of CEC breaches have been made over the past few years?
I think that question, if we can ask them to submit the question via the EMA Webinars website, then we could provide some additional information or a response to that question. I am sure that there is a record of the breaches that the EMA is aware of, but any additional information that they may require, we can facilitate it through the EMA Webinars email, please.
Yeah, so please send that question to our email address. Have the rules changed when it applies to asking for printouts at the EMA library? When requiring a copy of an application or TOR, there is a limit of 10 pages allowed for the last 5 years. This is not feasible. An application is usually double that amount. Payment is being made for each page. This has resulted in several persons having to go into the library for different pages on the same application. Perhaps it's a long question, but I should repeat it for the benefit of Anat and Alicia. Have the rules changed when it applies to asking for printouts at the EMA library? When requiring a copy of an application or TOR, there is a limit of 10 pages allowed for the last 5 years. So over the last 5 years. This is not feasible. An application is usually double that amount. Payment is being made for each page. This has resulted in several persons having to go into the library for different pages on the same application. Perhaps you can also send that question to EMA webinars at ema.co.tt because it's not a technical question. It deals with or treats with our information center. So we would like to defer that question. Okay. Next question. I noticed the CEC does not cover point pollution among residential properties. In particular, discharge or septage, human waste captured in septic tanks and pit latrines into the environment and open drains. Would the EMA be revising their regulations from a polluter's pay principle as it relates to septage management and on-site sanitation systems that are proximal to water, groundwater well extraction sites, etc.? Alicia?
Would you like me to take that one, Martin?
Well, if you would, Anna, I'd be very grateful. Would you like me to reread the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I thought so. I noticed the CEC does not cover point pollution among residential properties. In particular, discharge of septage, human waste captured in septic tanks and pit latrines into the environment and open drains. Would the EMA be revising their regulations from a polluter's pay principle as it relates to septage management and on-site sanitation systems?
Maybe to start at the end, the legislative review process is, well, as you understand, is a bit rigorous. However, if we sort of work back into your question, typically, so with all waste or water pollution rules, it looks at point source discharges as you referred to. But this type of infrastructure, be it namely septic tanks, soakaways, typically does not have a surface discharge. So where that exists, it wouldn't fall within the remit of the EMA. Remember, we exist within a legislative framework, so we can't be ultra-virus. We can't try to enforce or regulate outside of the remit of our legislation. So there are other statutes that exist, for example, the Municipal Corporations Act that looks into, and WASA, and the Water and Sewage Authority, that looks into the regulation and design of wastewater treatment or on-lot wastewater treatment facilities. So not the larger scale, regional type wastewater treatment plants. Also, we have to be cognizant of our site development standards. So ideally, when we're in compliance with site development standards as set out in the Town and Country Planning Act and the Partially Proclaimed Planning and Facilitation and Development Act, it looks at your site coverage, be it your built or your covered and your paved area, as opposed to your unbuilt or your undeveloped area. And this ratio would usually allow on-lot site systems sufficient space to adequately diffuse into the environment, as opposed to having these concentration or these hotspots of contaminants. So it's a bit multifaceted. It's a bit involving consideration of a series of pieces of legislation. It's a valid point. Looking at point sources where they exist from residential type developments, because we need to be mindful as well. I mean, looking at this COVID situation and maybe the uptick in cottage type industries. So where we have that mix of home-based type activities, your red mango makers, your preserves, your agro processing, you're making a pepper sauce at home, and what sort of waste streams comes out of it. So it switches from a purely residential use to that sort of commingling of waste being discharged from your facility. So again, just to be mindful of, there are other pieces of legislation which regulates this, as well as this new normal, and us trying to supplement our income and looking at the cottage industry contributing to effluent or discharges from residential type uses. Back to you, Marcia.
Thank you very much, Arnold. The audio is a bit distorted at this point. That's my audio. So I think this is a good time for us to end. And I will end with a comment from Rich. And he says, thank you for the information, good presentation, and I also appreciate the transparency with making all CC applications available to the public. Excellent work, and thank you, Rich, for that comment. We are very grateful. So at this point in time, we would like to thank all participants for sharing with us and staying for more than an hour on this webinar. We're very grateful for that. And I'd like to invite you to join us on Tuesday, the 22nd of September, for our next webinar, which will treat with permit monitoring and what happens after a permit has been issued. And on that note, I would like to urge everyone to consider and pay attention to the COVID-19 guidelines as prescribed by the health regulations, the public health regulations 2020, the wearing of masks, social distancing, washing of hands, and just being generally very mindful that we have number of cases arising steadily, and of course, unfortunately, deaths as well. So please be mindful, because as our Prime Minister said, we're not doing this to restrain or restrict anyone to make life difficult. We're doing this to save lives and to sustain livelihoods. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, 22nd September. Have a pleasant evening, everyone.